Midseason report look like, and who should they start at quarterback when they host Hawaii this Saturday night at 10:15 Eastern, 8:15 Mountain Time? Those just two of the loaded topics that ESPN college football analyst Trevor Matich tackles in his one-on-one interview with Jarom Jordan. He joined us on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline.
All right, Trevor, we've had the weekend to digest it or maybe not digest it. I don't know. BYU loses 45-20 to Utah State on Friday. What's your initial reaction to that result?
Well, it's kind of crushing in some ways because it's Utah State. They haven't beat BYU back-to-back years, I think, since the 70s. It's just to lose to them from a BYU perspective is just awful. To get blown out is worse. But at the same time, there's a couple of things you have to look at from a dispassionate analyst perspective. One is that Utah State is really, really good this year. I mean, they've got dudes, and they can play. Another is that Utah State the week before had a bye while BYU was up getting pounded by Washington. And so I think that really told in the second half, especially on defense, when the Utah State running game really took off and BYU just didn't have much left. And so when you combine that with some sloppy play on both sides of the ball, part of that I think was that they were just beat down. It adds up to a huge victory for the Aggies, and I'm happy for them and their fans. It's a great moment for them. But from a BYU perspective, I think what the program needs right now is a collective nap. You know, a bye week would be good. If not, I think they just need to just take a nap, man, and just get some rest because they're beat up.
Talking to Trevor Matich of ESPN, the bye week comes after this next game against Hawaii, which we'll discuss in a moment. But against Utah State, it didn't seem like anybody did anything really well in terms of what side of the ball, right? Offense, defense, special teams, there were all kinds of mistakes. But in your mind, where did it unravel the most?
It unraveled the most that the offense couldn't bust a grape in any way. I mean, you would expect the passing game to struggle a bit just because the passing game sort of always does. But even though Utah State was going to come up to the line of scrimmage and complicate the run with numbers, you would expect the running game to do better than it did. I mean, they had 14 yards rushing, BYU did, until late in the fourth quarter when Wilson busted off a run as a quarterback. I mean, up to that point, the longest run that BYU had, Katoa had a 5-yard run. Yay. And even though BYU was pounded, and, you know, there was a very physical game a few weeks ago against Wisconsin, and then another very physical game against Washington. And really before that, I think Cal's defense is shaping up to be one of the better defenses in the country. And I think when you just add that up, then BYU's offense just wasn't able to get any push at all. And when you consider that the strength of this offense is the offensive line, I think that's where you know it just was not going to be their day.
Well, we thought it was the strength. We'll see. I mean, we're halfway through the season now, and it's hard to know. BYU at 3-3, and like you mentioned, 2.4 yards per carry, not going to do it. Cougars in Hawaii coming up Saturday. So now the question becomes this, Trevor. We are halfway through the season. BYU is bottom 30 in every major statistical category from points, yards, pass yards, rush yards, yards per play. And we saw a little bit of Zach Wilson at the end there. Have we seen enough of Tanner Mangum and a little bit enough, I guess, of Zach Wilson to think that perhaps BYU should start Zach Wilson or let him get some run on Saturday?
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to put him in. Not to start him, because you don't want to start him as a freshman, and if he struggles, then have to bench him again. That would be horrible for his confidence. But to give him a designed series late in the first quarter, or maybe the third series, and then maybe the seventh series, that kind of a thing, so that he can study the plays that they're going to give him an actual script, give him a chance to come see what the defense is doing from the bench, come off the bench, run a series, go back to the bench and put Tanner back in. I think that's the way to develop them. And there's a couple of reasons why they should do that. One is that they're going to need to develop their quarterback for next year. That's something that's ongoing. It has nothing to do with the quality of the play of Tanner Mangum this year. It has everything to do with how you build a program. You've got to get your young guys ready to go. Another reason is that there seemed to be a spark when he came in at the end of the game last week against Utah State. Now, the game was over. Utah State had their backups in. It was just, it wasn't the same as starting the game. But sometimes, even though it doesn't seem to make much sense, a different guy at quarterback creates a different atmosphere and a different feeling. It's a spark. And you can't always anticipate it. It doesn't always seem to work, but sometimes it might. And I think right now this offense needs a spark, and it may be that a switch at quarterback, without saying that Tanner should be benched or that pointing fingers at Tanner necessarily. This is kind of a team effort that the offense is struggling right now. But at the same time, when you put in a new guy, sometimes it works. And I think that the seniors deserve to know if Wilson can come in and give them that spark.
I think BYU should seek to get it right instead of try and be right. Senior quarterback, whatever, right? We're talking to ESPN's Trevor Matich. BYU at 3-3 through 6. I think before the season, if you had said BYU's 3-3, we would all say, okay, I'd take that. But the way that BYU's played the last 2 games has been straight up pathetic, Trevor. So how would you evaluate how BYU is playing right now? And how did this team beat Wisconsin 3 weeks ago?
Oh, they beat Wisconsin because they rose up and did the very best they could. And they were tough on both lines. The D-line and the offensive line were phenomenal against Wisconsin. The passing game, they manufactured some throws that gave them some important drive-extending plays, some big plays. The running game was creative. They used a lot of jet sweeps, and the wide receivers were a big factor in the running game, which Wisconsin, I think, didn't anticipate to the degree that they saw it. Other teams have seen it on film now. And Wisconsin helped BYU by dropping some passes, having some key penalties. And it all added up to BYU being able to pull it off. And BYU deserves tremendous credit for how they played. But again, there's attrition that happens. I mean, when you do that against a team like Wisconsin, you get beat down. And against McNeese the following week, you could tell BYU just wasn't sharp, and they looked like they played with heavy legs. And then Washington just beat them down some more. And so I think the scheduling, you want to schedule tough. You want to schedule these teams at the top tier of college football. But the way that it shakes out, BYU is still in the process of building up the depth, especially at the line of scrimmage, to be able to come out of games like that with enough freshness to continue forward. So I like the scheduling, but I think we're still a couple years away from Kalani Sitake being able to stack the lines of scrimmage with the kind of depth you need to stand up to that.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and BYU is not backing away from it, especially in September. In comes Hawaii, one of the surprise teams in college football, off the radar because the schedule hasn't been particularly tough, although I want to be careful about saying that because we said that about Utah State last week. Cole McDonald, status unknown, didn't start last week for Hawaii, but that team's 6-1. This is a team you played in the WAC back in the day. This is going to be an interesting matchup on Saturday night between the upstart Hawaii team and a BYU team that needs to win at home, Trevor.
Yeah, and BYU will have to get after the quarterback. I mean, the pass rush has kind of been anemic, which happens when you've got heavy legs after getting kind of beat down a little bit. But the secondary has played pretty well. They've given up some big plays, but overall, I think the defensive backfield will have a chance to really shine in this game. And Hawaii's defense, not so good. I mean, this is a fun team to watch because they'll score a lot of points. They'll give up a lot of points. I mean, right now, Hawaii is the leading scoring team in the Mountain West, but they also are one of the worst defensive teams from a point allowed standpoint in the Mountain West Conference. So this should be a really, really fun game. But I tell you, the FPI, ESPN's Football Power Index, gave BYU about a 38% chance of winning the game against Utah State. So the FPI heavily favors Utah State, and they were right. They show BYU has an 87% chance of beating Hawaii. So if FPI is correct here, and if BYU can come out with a win, then they've got a really good chance of getting to a bowl game.
Let's talk about the week in college football nationally. Some great games coming up, notably Georgia and LSU, Washington and Oregon, Wisconsin, at Michigan. What's the best game this week in your opinion?
Well, I think Wisconsin-Michigan is just massive. Both of those teams have one loss to a non-conference opponent, and both of those teams are legitimate contenders for the playoff. They could sweep and get out to become a 12-1 Big Ten championship, and it'll be force against force because Wisconsin has one of the best offenses, rushing offenses in the country. And Michigan has a legitimate playoff caliber defense. So if that rushing offense isn't impeded, Wisconsin's, by some drop passes and penalties and things like that, like it was against BYU, then it'll just be a phenomenal, physical, old-school, throwback, smash-mouth kind of game. I love that game. I think a sneaky one, though, under the radar is Washington, Oregon, because there's a lot of hate in this game. I mean, that you don't think of Washington, Oregon nationally as a big rivalry, but 2 years ago, Washington went down there and scored 70 points at Autzen Stadium. I mean, Jake Browning scores a touchdown, and as he's crossing the goal line, he's pointing his finger at a linebacker that's not quite close enough to stop him. Last year, Washington blew him out up in Seattle, and that same linebacker smashed Jake Browning in the face mask. I mean, he hit him in the head hard in revenge. I think that's a sneaky, fun game to watch just because the sheer football hatred between those two teams is real.
Having lived in the Northwest, I get it. I can't wait for this weekend. Should be fun. As always, Trevor, we appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you, Jerem.
ESPN